Hi, welcome to this little bite-sized session. Hopefully it's going to give you some information just to think about supporting your own mental health and well-being. So lots of sort of proactive tips and things that you can adopt that will help you to deal with any stress, anxiety, worries that you might have. So we're going to look in this little session about stress and the effects of stress, the importance of self-care, some tips and techniques for better mental health, and finally we've got some useful resources to support positive mental health and well-being. And that's what we all want to achieve, really, isn't it? So we all need that sort of positive mental health and well-being to deal with the ups and downs and the negative things that might happen from day to day. So it's really important that we see self-care as a necessity and not a luxury, not something we do, once in a blue moon when we think about it, but something that we really place some importance on, because that's how we actually build resilience, maintain that resilience and that better positive mental well-being. So really just be kind to yourself, don't beat yourself up if you're not achieving what you need to achieve, and just sort of treat yourself as you would treat your friends and your family, and try and sort of get that self-care in your daily routine. And that's what we're going to look at, some of the sort of tips of how you might do that. So first of all, let's understand what stress is really. Stress is not a mental health condition, so it's not something that you would be diagnosed with. But there's a lot of research, it's really well founded that stress can be the precursor to poor mental health and well-being. So if we're feeling stressed about a situation and we're not able to actually put things in place to relieve some of that stress and deal with it, then the chances are it can escalate and become something more serious that might take longer to recover from, and also maybe some specialist treatment to recover from. So, if we can deal with these things early, then that's going to be a really positive thing for us as individuals. But it is different for different people. So we're all individual. We all have a sort of different benchmark really for stress. And that's something that's really important to understand, because when we're looking at other people, we might sort of be comparing and seeing why they're able to deal with the same situation in a different way to us. And it's just that we're all different, and we're going to explore that a little bit more. So we all have a different level of vulnerability to stress. So the effects of stress then, we're probably all familiar with this because we all know what stress feels like, because we all experience it from time to time. And a little bit of stress is a good thing. It motivates us, it gets us up in the morning, it gets us working, doing what we need to do. But it's when it starts to impact on us, that's when it's becoming unhelpful. And we need to understand that for ourselves so that we can take some steps and do something about it. So I've just put a few things, some ideas about how we might experience stress. Stress can be very physical. So it might be that we experience headaches, maybe it's disturbing our sleep, insomnia, and we might be getting sort of unexplained aches and pains, that kind of muscle tension that sort of starts to build. Might be very emotional for some people, so we might get quite irritable, tearful, maybe a little bit agitated, might even feel quite low in mood and start experiencing depression. So, it can be a mix of these things. How we think, the cognitive symptoms, those sort of racing thoughts, indecisiveness, some of that is linked to that insomnia, that inability to sleep and that fatigue that might start to build up. And then some behaviours, so we might withdraw. Some people will take themselves away from the situation and try and avoid and get away from things. We might start some unhealthy eating habits, eating too much, eating too little. Or we might start overusing alcohol. And alcohol is quite a common thing that people might turn to when they're feeling stressed, because in the short term, it kind of helps us think that we're dealing with things and feel a little bit better. But in the long term, that's going to actually add to how we're dealing with stress. So it's not a positive coping strategy. And what we need to do is adopt some helpful coping strategies. So we'll sort of explore that a bit more and what those strategies might look like. But it's really important to understand that all of those things there, obviously that is not an exhaustive list of how people might experience stress and the things they might experience. But it just gives you some ideas that it's going to be different for everybody. I mean, personally, I know if I'm stressed because I usually get headaches, and I also become a little bit irritable. So, if I know that, then I can do something about it rather than let it have an effect on, relationships with the people around me, and actually escalate and become something more than it needs to. So that's really important, that we become self-aware. So how to cope with stress then? This is our kind of analogy of how individual stress can be. The stress bucket. You'll find it if you Google it, you'll find there's lots of bits of information. And also on the National Mind website, there's lots of information about things like this. So again, find some resources, actually use them. But if we think of this analogy of a bucket and stress being like water flowing into the bucket, if we don't take any steps and we do nothing, then at some point that bucket will overflow. And the bucket kind of represents our vulnerability to stress. So the fact that our bucket is smaller and we're more vulnerable to stress doesn't really make a difference as long as we're able to carry that bucket. So although there are things we can do that are positive that might actually increase the size of the bucket, so increase our sort of protective factors against stress, it's not really the size of the bucket, it's just that individuality really for all of us, and being aware of that. So if we do nothing, the bucket is going to overflow, and that's where usually call that emotional snapping, but that's also our stress signature. For each of us, we've got an individual stress signature. So that's sort of our trigger for knowing that, we don't want to get to that place. We want to sort of prevent that happening if we can. And one of the ways we can do that is actually putting a tap in the bucket. So if we've got a tap in the bucket, we can let the stress just keep flowing through, as long as we're adopting some good coping strategies, some helpful coping strategies. So things like that might be talking to somebody when we're stressed and struggling. It might be actually asking for some support from work, from our colleagues, from our manager. It might be the things that we do outside of work. So looking after ourselves, a bit of exercise, what we eat, what we drink, all of these kinds of things are helpful coping strategies. Doing the things that we enjoy, the hobbies, the sport, the activities, whatever it is that puts a smile on our face, things that we like, things we enjoy. Bad coping strategies, unfortunately, are often easier to adopt. So, for example, I've already sort of said, stress can sort of make us think, well, actually, I'm going to have a couple of glasses of wine tonight, but that can then start to develop into more alcohol. So those sort of bad coping strategies might feel like they're working in the short term, but actually they're kind of adding to how we're feeling and how we're coping with things. In terms of the analogy of the bucket, the bad coping strategy, all we're doing is delaying that emotional snapping. We're not dealing with the situation, we're actually just delaying it because it will happen at some point. So we need to try and keep that stress flowing. So if you think of it in terms of a bucket and sort of the stress flowing through like the water would through the tap, adopting those helpful coping strategies is the way to go, really, to try and deal with some of the things and improve how we're able to deal with things more logically. So some of the things to avoid, the unhelpful coping strategies. I've mentioned alcohol already because that is quite a common coping strategy for people. Alcohol is actually a depressant. So if we're already low in mood because we're not feeling like we're dealing with things very well and we're feeling stressed and anxious, then we're actually sort of adding to the problem and likely to increase that low mood. So this is where stress can start to become more of a mental health condition. In the middle, we've got the sort of sugary things, that sugar spike that we get, which feels great at the time, but very quickly that will be a sugar crash. And then we start to again feel quite fatigued, lethargic, unable to concentrate, which in work is not really what we want to do. Avoiding things like caffeine, which is in lots of things bad for anxiety, not going to be helpful. So just thinking about how much that we have of it. And if we're faced with really stressful situations, then thinking about some of these things might actually help us deal with those stressful situations. They're not going to go away. We've got to deal with them, but we might be able to deal with them in a more sort of positive, logical way. And things like takeaway foods, again, really kind of nice at the time, but then they're going to actually lead to that sort of slump and that lethargy, and we're going to want more food, so we're going to snack more, and the chances are we're going to snack on unhealthy things if that's what we've done. So food and mood really, really linked, and some of the ways that food affects us mentally can be really unhelpful. So some other tips and techniques then for better mental health and well-being. We often adapt this sort of three-point strategy around it. So there's three aspects to this. There's the sort of action-orientated approach, there's the emotion-orientated approach, and then the acceptance. And if we can adopt maybe one or two, or maybe even all of these strategies, then again, it helps us feel like we are more in control of what's happening. So in the first place, the action-orientated approach, if we can deal with a situation that is making us stressful and anxious and feeling unwell with our mental health, then try and do that, but do it in the full knowledge that we're able to deal with the repercussions of what might come out of that. So an example of that might be that you've had a fallout with a friend, and you sort of, things are just building up over time. Just have that conversation, actually speak to them, tell them how it's made you feel, etc. But do it in the knowledge that there may be some repercussions that come out of that. If it's something that's outside your control, maybe it could be how you've got to deal with things because of government guidelines. We're all having to do different things at different times as situation changes. Some of that is out of our control. So therefore, we maybe can't take action to change it. We've just got to then maybe move on to that kind of acceptance. This is how it is, but how am I going to deal with it? So actually focusing on being in that best possible situation by making sure that we're looking after ourselves, our diet, how we sort of look after ourselves physically as well as mentally, can be really positive for us from a mental well-being point of view. So it might be that we have to just move to that acceptance and actually just focus on the things that we can control, the things that we can take control of and be in charge of, really. And the emotion-orientated part of the approach, how things happen and how we feel about things, because a lot of stress and anxiety is around perception of a situation. It's not necessarily the situation itself that affects us, but how we think and feel about that situation. So in the emotion-orientated approach, the idea is that we are able to change that perception. So it might mean that we've got to challenge how we're thinking about it. Why am I thinking about that? I can't change it, which links into the acceptance bit. Or why am I thinking that that's going to happen? It's never happened before. Is it likely to happen? Probably not. So therefore, it helps us deal with the sort of emotional part of the situation, of how we're thinking and feeling about it. And sometimes, a good example for me would be traffic. That's probably one of the times when I get the most stressed, really, when I'm kind of stuck in traffic and I've got to get somewhere. And it's just, nobody likes to sort of be stuck when they've got things to do. So what I do is I sort of give myself a reward. So if I'm going to be stuck in traffic for sort of 10 minutes or more, I'll put on some of my favourite music. And that's my kind of reward, and it changes the way I think about the situation. So actually, I'm getting something nice out of the situation, which helps change that perception, and it changes it out of a negative event into something more positive. So that's just an example. But those three sort of approaches to how we think and feel about situations can make a huge difference on our overall mental well-being. And it's all about building that resilience to deal with the sort of day-to-day things that we are going to have to deal with as things change over the next months. The 5 ways to wellbeing is a good way to incorporate all of that. I'm not going to go into it in any great detail, but it is there on the internet. So if you just sort of Google 5 ways to wellbeing, you'll find it. There's a lot of information on different mental health charity websites around it. I just found out yesterday, I think Public Health England are actually adopting the 5 ways to wellbeing as a strategy moving forward. So I think you'll see a lot more of it. And it just makes perfect sense. If we're doing all these 5 things, then it just adds to how we're feeling with our emotional literacy and our sort of capacity to deal with things with our mental health. 10 Keys to Happier Living. I really like this. The website, the Action for Happiness website, is great. Lots of resources, lots of things that you can download and have around your offices, and, sort of resources that you can give to people or signpost people to. You can follow them on social media. So every day, each month, they'll have a calendar of sort of something every day, and then each day they put out on social media some sort of positive message, really. I kind of follow them on Twitter, and you get like a nice positive message every day, and it just does kind of put a smile on your face, or it helps put things into perspective. A lot of them are around actual perspective on what's going on and what we're dealing with, and how things are affecting us. So I'd say have a look at that. It sort of follows on from the 5 ways to wellbeing, really. And then I always like this, the Feel Good 5. So this is about just taking a little bit of time to reflect on what are the things that make me happy. What are the things that I can do and should be doing to continue to have that positive mental wellbeing. And that could be anything. That could be, going out for a walk with the dog every day, or it could be connecting with friends in some way, ringing, dropping a text, whatever it might be. So actually just thinking about it, but it's a nice reminder then, if you've actually taken time to write those 5 things down, it's something to look back on and remind yourself, because we all start with good intentions, but then things happen and things slide, and it's a good way to sort of keep things on track. A few more tips for positive mental wellbeing. I've already mentioned food. Sleep is really important. Think about how you can get the best sort of sleep. There's lots of information on the various mental health charity websites about sleep, because it is a really important part of our overall mental wellbeing. Maybe mindfulness, meditation, yoga, tai chi, any form of relaxation is a really good way to sort of deal with some of the stresses of everyday life. So I would encourage you to give some of those things a try. Things like Headspace is a good app that you can get on your phone, but there's lots of other free apps that you can access. Maybe thinking about the hobbies that you enjoy doing. So we've got an example there of gardening, but there's lots of different hobbies, and it's finding what suits you, and if it's something you enjoy, you're more likely to do it more often, and that's what we want to encourage, really, because that's going to build that sort of emotional literacy and mental capacity. And then a little bit of exercise, so people have sort of taken to going out on their bikes, or maybe doing a little bit of running or walking. It doesn't have to be a huge amount of exercise, just a little bit of exercise every day, because that gets us up, it stimulates our sort of brain thinking, and, helps us to concentrate, but it also helps us to sleep better. And sleep deals with anger and frustration. So there's lots of other benefits to sleep. So all of those things kind of link in together, really. And if we can, sort of make some changes, and they only have to be subtle changes, it can make a huge difference to how we're feeling with our stress levels, or how we're dealing with our stress levels. The final thing I want to introduce you to is the Wellness Action Planning. This is a good document to use in the workplace. It's a good framework for a conversation around well-being with your manager, or if you're a manager, with your staff. Because it's about sort of people being proactive and taking responsibility for themselves, but also having those conversations about how other people can support you with your well-being. So have a look on the Mind website. It is a Mind document. There's one that's for employees, there's one that's for managers, and then there's some sort of guidance as well, some general guidance. So have a look. There's lots of good things in there that sort of stimulate you to think about, what am I doing? How do I deal with stress? Could I make some changes that actually might help me deal with it in a more positive way? So I think it's a good document, and it sort of gets you thinking about being more proactive and taking some steps to better mental health and well-being. And then just finally some resources, and I've mentioned most of these: the National Mind website, Mental Health Foundation, Action for Happiness. The How Are You Feeling website is the Head Start local website for Hull, which you can access, anybody can access via that sort of web address, and there's lots of resources on there for everybody. And then also the NHS apps. So if you like to have something on your phone, there's a whole library of apps around stress, anxiety, depression, all sorts of mental health conditions, real sort of proactive resources, things that you can do that encourage you to kind of do that on a daily basis. So I hope you found that useful. It's just a sort of starting point really to encourage you to really think about some of the steps you can take to improve how you're feeling with your mental health. But also if you sort of start to incorporate them and they become habits, then, you know, they're there forever, aren't they really? And we all want to be in that place where we've got positive mental health and well-being as much as possible. Thank you.